Let's bring in our guest, Seth Berenzweig, who is a trial attorney. Seth, thanks for joining us. I want to get your opinion. Did Andre Warner save himself by taking the stand? Your thoughts?
I'll tell you what, that was a really dramatic and incredible moment. You really saw a person on the witness stand who was literally fighting for his life, and I don't think he did very well. I thought the cross-examination was quite compelling, and I thought that he had a very difficult time on the stand in cross-examination.
You thought he came across as being dishonest because what his story is so dramatically different than the evidence brought up by the state. Basically, he's saying that Haley Bustos and every other person that took the stand was lying in great detail. Were you surprised that the prosecutor didn't go into more of that? You know, bring up, so you say Haley Bustos was lying when she said you grabbed a gun. You say she was lying, like repetitively remind the jury of all of the testimony that has come in against him. Were you surprised that, I mean, yeah, it was compelling, but pretty short too, the cross?
It's always a difficult call when you have someone on the witness stand where you can continue to dig in and get those kinds of results on cross-examination. However, sometimes less is more. I think she did a very effective job demonstrating the consistent dishonesty, the inconsistencies, issues with regard to the time when he woke up, the car, the residue in particular was extremely compelling. So I thought that the cross-examination was concise, it was tight, it was very persuasive, and I thought that she did a great job.
One of the big questions is how is he going to explain away this gunshot residue conversation that he had with Grandpa while incarcerated that was recorded, this phone call? Here's what the defendant said.
At some point in time, did Miss Bustos or did Haley talk to you about borrowing your car?
Yes, she did.
Okay. Can you tell us about that?
I got back. She told me she wanted to go get some weed or some K2 at the time. And she asked me to use my car. And if somebody needs to use my car, if I don't feel like going, I'll let them use my car. Just the type of person I am. If you need somebody, if you need some help, I'm there if I can. If I can't, then I can't.
Okay. In fact, you even later loaned her your car later that week, right?
Yes, sir, I did.
That was Andre Warner talking about lending his car to Haley Bustos, basically and saying that he wasn't there, he just lent out his car. Did you find that believable that he lends his car out and then everybody comes home and they're drinking liquor and he's just doing shots but has no questions of what just went down?
No, I don't think the jury's going to buy that. He was inconsistent and dishonest to the police about the car, about the exchange of information about what happened with regard to the death as exchanged with his girlfriend. I thought that he did very poorly on cross-examination with regard to the conversation with his grandfather with regard to the residue. He held up on a few questions, but overall, we were looking at a person who was literally fighting for his life on the witness stand, and I think he lost that fight. And it really ends up being also a very cautionary tale with regard to these online dating apps. This is not the first time that this app has been in the news for this kind of an issue, as well as other online dating apps. So we'll see if there's a case in rebuttal by the prosecution, but that was really a very telling and dramatic moment watching that cross-examination of the defendant on the witness stand.
Yeah, and the prosecution has not made a decision yet if they are going to bring on a rebuttal case. We're going to step aside, take a quick break. We'll be right back. Okay, as they hash out the jury instructions, let's bring in our guest, Seth Berenzweig, trial attorney. Seth, let's look ahead to 1 o'clock. Let's assume there is no rebuttal case here. That still has not been decided. Closing arguments, starting with the state of Florida. What are you going to do if you are presenting the close for the state? What are you harping on?
Well, I think I'm going to really jump right into that compelling cross-examination that we had heard just moments ago. It was just so dramatic, and I think that there's no reason why that really wouldn't be at the top of the list. And I think that I would also focus in the background with regard to how gruesome the facts are of this to really drive home to the jury what kind of a case we're talking about here, which is why I really believe that this is going to be a warning bell that's going to be ringing coast to coast in the country with regard to potential danger of online dating apps. Remember that the woman, Ms. Bustos, who was at the center of this alleged conspiracy, she got paid $50 to basically give this guy up to people that had very violent past. When you take a look at the angle of the bullet trajectory that went into the decedent's head, it was at a downward angle that I'm sure will be pointed out to the jury that demonstrates an execution-style murder. And this is a person who really begged for his life and was making it clear that he has a daughter who is very young. He was literally on his knees begging for his life to no avail. And then after paying Ms. Bustos $50, they murder this person, and then they walk out with his TVs and a couple of bottles of alcohol. What an unbelievable case. I think that's going to be very compelling to the jury. The judge is already starting to get some of the groundwork ready so that when the jury comes back and we get through the closing arguments, he's keeping this trial moving along in a very steady fashion.
What would you do if this was your client and you were representing him for your close? What would you say to this jury?
Well, that's a really, really difficult path to take. I think that you really just have to grab onto the underlying standard of proof beyond a reasonable doubt. He did have a couple of points that he scored on the direct examination of his client, for example. There was a discussion about how while he didn't profess his innocence to his grandfather on that one call, he made it clear in other phone calls that he didn't do it. So there's definitely some grist for the mill on that, but it's going to be really an uphill battle for the defense. At the end of the day, they're going to be making the point that this person's life is on the line. The jury has to be completely satisfied that that evidentiary standard is met. And right now, we're going to really literally see this person's life on the line. But at least he has his day in court. The decedent who was executed, of course, he never got that day. And despite pleading for his life, he tried to do so, unfortunately, to no avail.
You don't believe Warner did very well on the stand in his own defense, but do you think by taking the stand, he makes it, if he is found guilty, that much more difficult for this jury to recommend an execution?
Well, that's a great question, because one of the reasons why a defense counsel makes this incredibly difficult decision of whether to put their client on the stand is to try to humanize the client, to try to let the jury meet this individual and hear from him while they take into consideration this very serious charge. But it can really backfire very quickly, because if you demonstrate, as I think the prosecution did, that he's lying to them, then at the end of the day, it could be a very risky strategy that may very well backfire in this case.
Right. At one end, you could say that the jury becomes familiar with him. He's on the stand. He talks about his grandfather dying. That's how they ended it. You could maybe argue the empathy, but to your point, if I'm a juror and I believe that he just sat there and lied consistently for an hour and a half from direct through cross, then it's a little easier to pull the trigger, isn't it, on that horrible decision that each one of these jurors is going to have to make, and that is between life and death. All right, Seth Berenzweig, thank you so much for your expertise and your insight on this dramatic morning